Hey YouTube, been a long time since I've made a video. I know I'm not the greatest at making videos and I don't put any real effort into production quality. I'm just going to blabber like I usually do. Anyway, Hunter Braxton has made another of his questions for atheists. This time it's only 5 questions instead of 10. And this time his questions are different than most questions for atheists have been I've seen before. So I thought they were interesting enough to try to do a response to. And uh, so here it goes. The first question was in regard to Cameron of Capturing Christianity, who says that he quote unquote no longer takes atheism seriously. It then goes on to say that even if he were to accept atheists' strongest arguments, that would still not prove atheism. Well, it's kind of hard to take Cameron seriously. After all these years, he still doesn't know what the word atheism means. It just means a lack of belief in God. The fact that I personally lack belief in God proves atheism. Okay, now I assume that he means prove that God doesn't exist. If that's not what he means, I don't know what he does mean. But very few atheists even claim definitively that God does not exist. We generally assert that there simply isn't good reason to accept the proposition that God exists. And some of us will assert that some God concepts, like the conservative Christianity with a literal Adam and Eve, Noah's flood, we might say that those are disproved, even if we might accept that some God concepts are still at least possible. I'm in that camp. I think that the Christian God is not possible. Perhaps something like a deistic God exists. I don't think so, but if perhaps it does, what difference does it make to me? I mean, if this entity doesn't interact with the universe after it's created it, then what difference does it make to me? Or if there's some other God, neither deism nor Christian, then I don't know what it is. Bottom line, Cameron's statement is ridiculous. Virtually nobody anyway, is trying to disprove any possible God concept. And what we are saying is that there's not a good reason to believe in God, specifically in his God. Okay. Second question is, what was so special about the recent election that has some atheist YouTubers questioning their own online presence? And the answer is the USA just elected somebody who's explicitly made revenge against perceived enemies a primary focus of his agenda. And while Trump tried to distance himself from Project 2025, the truth is he and his partners in crime are and were behind it and attempt to diminish the Constitution and hand as much power to the president as possible and allow Trumpageddon to be his uh, revenge, Trumpageddon Revenge 2.0. So that is the reason why this election was scary. Is the same reason why even reasonably educated conservatives think it was scary. You like Liz Cheney. I don't agree with Liz Cheney on very much, but at least we both agree that Trump is a dangerous fascist. USA just elected a fascist, pure and simple. That's why this election was more different than any other. The third question is, do I believe in determinism or do I believe in free will? And if I believe in determinism, how are people held morally responsible for their action? And the cop out answer is if there's no free will, then whether we do or do not hold people morally responsible for their actions, we do not have the free will to or not do so. Okay. Now, presumably, Hunter is asking for justification. If we hold people morally responsible for their actions and they had no free will to not do it, what is the justification? And actually, the justification is determinism itself. If people's actions are determined, then what are they determined by? They're determined by their brain chemistry and past events. Past events include whether we had previously held or did not hold other people accountable for their actions. Thus, determinism itself is the moral justification for holding people accountable for their actions. Now, I'm not a philosopher, and I even have a hard time grasping what even free will even could possibly be. I'm going to borrow from YouTuber TMM, the Messianic Mechanic, I believe. Free will is apparently not deterministic, and yet, if it's not deterministic, then what is it? Is it random? And theists who posit free will generally don't say it is random. But what other choice is there? What is neither deterministic nor random? So, so I don't even know what free will would be. So to answer the question, do I believe in determinism or free will? I don't seem to have any other choice. I don't have a, if you can give me a coherent option that's not determinism and not randomness, then I'm all ears. But until you give me something that I can find as coherent, then I don't have any choice. I have no free will to choose otherwise. The fourth question is about atheists and Richard Dawkins. Many atheists have tried to distance themselves from Richard Dawkins, especially on the issue of trans rights. Now, I haven't actually listened to what Dawkins has said, so I really can't say how much I would agree with or don't disagree. Dawkins, believe it or not, is not my God, and I don't listen to, I don't go to his sermons to listen to what he has to say. I've read a few of his books. I even once went to a speech he gave, but I don't pay attention to everything he says. I think he has said that he considers himself a cultural Christian and that perhaps that is some justification for anti-trans views. I know specifically some other atheist woman has said that, and I think Dawkins has too, but I'm not 100% certain. Now, I confess I'm fairly ignorant on trans. I had previously thought off and on that maybe I should make a little video on trans, but it would basically be a confession of being pretty ignorant. And I confess I find it pretty difficult to relate to being transgender. I'm not transgender myself. Cisgender is, I believe, the official term. And I dare say that transgender comes across as weird to me as it seems to come across to many conservative Christians. But psychologists say it's a real thing. It's not like someone identifying as a cat or identifying as a toaster, that somebody's gender identity seems to be a real thing and that it really can mismatch with their biology. Again, I can't personally relate to it. Again, it seems kind of weird that that could be the case. But to my understanding, that's what psychologists say, that that is a real thing. So if we accept that it's a real thing, what should we do? What options should be available to a trans person? I know that many people who are anti-trans rights would say that, well, what they should be given is counseling to accept the physical body that they have. But the thing is, I feel pretty dang certain that is exactly what is done as a first option. Again, I'm not a psychologist, I could be wrong, but I'm pretty certain that that is the first thing that people will attempt to do. Now, I also understand that any trans person might find body modification into the opposite sex to be pretty drastic. It seems pretty drastic to me. I certainly wouldn't want it to happen to me, that's for sure. But I'm not a psychologist, psychiatrist, I'm not a doctor, and I'm not a trans person. So what does my opinion on it matter? It's none of my business. It's none of, but that said, it's to my understanding that most studies on gender reassignment surgery show that people who have it are happier, by and large, 99% or 98% are happier after than before. And that of the few percent that do regret having it, regret it precisely because of the fact that they've been rejected by society. And so that if people didn't reject them, the acceptance ratio, the regret percentage would be even lower, presumably. At least that's what I understand the science to be. And I'm not qualified to say it's not. Now, there may be the clutching of pearls, but won't somebody please think of the children? Won't somebody think of the children? And say that children should not be given gender reassignment surgery. But at least to my understanding, children do not get gender reassignment surgery. Put it this way, if that was happening, I'd be against it too, all right? Trump, who said that minors can go to school one day, be a boy, and they come home a girl, and that's just a lie. That doesn't happen. Now, minors can be given hormone suppression therapy, and this is true, but that is reversible. Say you're 16 and you think you're going to want to have gender reassignment surgery, and you start taking hormones, and then when you're 18, you think, maybe this isn't for me. You just stop taking the hormone blockers and you go back to the way you were. So if something permanent was being done to minors, I think I'd probably be objecting to it too. But I don't see any reason to not allow hormones if that's what the doctor and the patient and the parents all seem to want. Okay. Now, would I be for giving gender suppression therapy to a child whose parents doesn't approve? I probably don't think so, but I don't want to make a, I don't know. Okay. So, bottom line is, I don't know exactly what Richard Dawkins said, but he's not trans, he's not a psychologist. So, what bloody difference does it make what he said? And what business is somebody being trans to you, Hunter? What is it is your business if somebody else is trans? Okay. Uh, did I miss a question? Okay. The fifth question is about the fine tuning argument. Braxton's first four questions were pretty unique, but the fine tuning is pretty old hat. Hunter gave some statistics about how incredibly precise the constants of the universe have to be in order to sustain life. Now, I believe that some physicists would dispute those numbers and say that actually the universal constants could actually be a lot different and still support life. But for sake of argument, I'm going to assume that Hunter's numbers are absolutely correct. Or even maybe that his numbers are orders of magnitude too generous. Maybe life is even less likely than Hunter's numbers imply. I'll accept that because it simply does not matter one bit. And let me explain. First, before I explain, I'm going to quote for another YouTuber, Noel Plum, who seems to not be making videos anymore, sadly. But he was quoting, I think he was quoting somebody else. I don't remember who he was quoting. But the quote I'm wanting to get to is where if there is no God, the ramifications are mind boggling. And if there is a God, the ramifications are mind boggling. I personally find existence itself to be mind boggling. It blows my mind. I'll be honest. When I try to contemplate it, it blows my mind. But to me, existence itself is no more and no less mind boggling with or without a God. So let me ask you to do a thought experiment. Imagine, if you can, for a moment, try that you don't know that anything exists, not even yourself. You don't know anything exists for sure. Imagine the following two scenarios. Scenario one, the universe as defined by Hunter with all those improbabilities, despite how improbable it is, somehow exists by itself, no other cause, no explanation, it just does. Option two, an entity capable of creating that universe, that defined universe, as improbable as it is, that entity that can create it exists. And that entity does, in fact, decide to create such a universe. And that this entity itself exists without further explanation, no cause, it just does. Now, you've given two scenarios. Calculate the probabilities of each scenario. You can't do it. There is no way to calculate such probabilities. But it is absolutely irrelevant to how improbable you say option one is. I don't care how many ones to the 100 billion trillion zeros, doesn't matter. No matter how improbable option one is, you can't say option two becomes any more probable. That's not the way math works. You don't get to say that one option is more probable simply because the other option is very improbable. Math just doesn't work that way. And it seems like by Occam's razor, option two has to be, no matter how improbable one is, option two has to be even less probable because not only do you have this improbable thing, the universe, but you also have another thing that can create it. So you have two things, but the first one, we at least know the universe does exist, and this God we don't know exists. At least I don't know that. You may say you do. So no matter how improbable you say option one is, number two has to be even more improbable. So I don't care how improbable your numbers are. Okay. Next, the fine-tuning argument, properly understood, is an argument against God. For if God is all-powerful, by definition, any and all universes would be fine-tuned for life because an all-powerful God could create life in any universe. If God created a universe that nothing exists but fire, God could create life in any universe. So if you are trying to argue that life requires all the constants that you had laid out, you yourself have disproved God, or at least an all powerful one, because you have said that God requires to have made the universe in this way. Further, as TMN pointed out, wouldn't life existing in a universe that is physically impossible for us to live in, yet somehow we still do, be more proof of God? Is it all that surprising that we live in a universe that we can't live in? Is that all that surprising? Wouldn't it be more surprising that we live in a universe that we can't live in and yet we somehow do? Wouldn't that be more surprising? Wouldn't that be a better proof of God? And finally, let's just say that everything I've just said about the fine tuning argument is wrong. And then, in fact, the fine tuning argument is a great argument for God. Which God? It certainly isn't the Christian God, not the literal conservative Christian God, anyways, because that God is a moron. I think it's an oxymoron for the all powerful, all knowing creator of the universe to simultaneously be a moron. I mean, that seems to be impossible. Thus, I mean, if hypothetically there is some deist God or some other kind of God that I don't know about, what can I do about it? What good would such information do me? If I even learned that to be a true statement, what good would that do me?